We are still within the year of 2002, and shortly after the release of Resident Evil 1's remake, Capcom finally released a title that has been in development for quite a while now. Like, a really long while. I first mentioned this game like 5 videos ago. An idea for a prequel had been floating around since the development of the first game, but it didn't start development until the release of Resident Evil 2, where it was paired up with a bunch of other titles that I've already talked about. Everything else in that list had managed to get released or reworked in some way, but Resident Evil 0 was stuck in development hell for significantly longer than any of the other entries. A big reason as to why that is their platform of choice, the Nintendo 64 DD. This would connect to your Nintendo 64 to allow you to play a handful of disked games, but that thing ended up crashing and burning even faster than the Sega Dreamcast did. So naturally, they moved their idea over to Nintendo 64 cartridges. This is a great idea at first because the cartridges offered faster data readings which would allow the player to switch between characters without any load times, something that was necessary on basically all CD-based consoles. The downside though was that Nintendo 64 cartridges can barely hold anything compared to a CD. So a ton of work had to be put in order to make it function within the restrictions. Ultimately, this proved to be a fruitless effort, and development of the game went into hibernation for a while, with the only known knowledge known about this version of Resident Evil 0 being what was collected in articles and a gameplay demo presented at the 2000 Tokyo Game Show, which provides an interesting look at the early version of the game and how surprisingly similar a lot of it was in the final release. So if you've seen other people's Resident Evil 0 videos and see that we're all using the exact same footage, that's why. We don't have a whole lot to work with. Sorry. Whenever the game was put on hiatus, a lot of the development plans weren't changed or discarded. They just waited until the technology caught up with their vision. And that ended up being achieved on the Nintendo GameCube, allowing the game to finally be finished just in time to see Resident Evil's classic survival horror era die. At the time of the release, Resident Evil 0 generally received positive reviews, but the fact is that Resident Evil 1 Remake still performed and sold better, and if that game wasn't going to spark a revival in survival horror on the GameCube, then there's no way that this one was going to pull it off. People were already calling the control scheme outdated in the game released a few months prior. It was obvious 0 wasn't going to be changing any minds. So, 0 was resigned to follow in Remake's footsteps anytime it did anything. It got ported over to the Wii and then got an HD remaster for all modern consoles and PC in 2016, which is the version I'm going to be looking at today. How well do the positive reviews hold up now? And is this game comparable to the peak that was Resident Evil Remake? Is it a hidden gem? Is it something special that everybody needs to try once? Oh, I'm so excited! Let's take a look at Resident Evil 0! The game starts with a very peculiar acknowledgement as it references the previous massive outbreaks that have occurred within the franchise.
A Midwestern town in America, Raccoon City.
Yes, the key event in Resident Evil. Must have.
A solitary island far off in the sea, Rockfort Island.
Yeah, that's a very important one too.
An island that would become the second Raccoon City, Sheena Island.
Resident Evil Survivor? Are we acknowledging that now? Are we allowed to acknowledge that now? You can tell that the script for this game was written very early in the series' life, because there is no way that any entry nowadays would ever dare reference Resident Evil Survivor's Sheena Island. Maybe they thought that that game was going to have more relevance in the future? But it seems that the reputation of Survivor convinced the writers to abandon any further development on the location. So this is basically the last time that Survivor has any modicum of relevancy in the greater Resident Evil lore. Even then, it's still really weird how they reference it here. The second Raccoon City? That was in no way comparable to the national tragedy that was Raccoon City. Wasn't Sheena Island an extremely isolated and secret location that was essentially entirely run by Umbrella? They were just casually running child prisons there. And while I'm sure that there were some innocent people who might have worked on that island, I really doubt that there was a competitive number of civilian casualties to that of Raccoon City. Also, and this is very important, the US government didn't need to fucking nuke the island on live TV. So this is a very funny thing to bring up in this manner.
Though it is believed that the international enterprise Umbrella was somehow involved, little is known as to the origin of this faceless corporation.
Somehow involved? I guess this title crawl is from the perspective of the ignorant masses? Because we as players know for a fact that Umbrella was heavily involved.
When was it established? By whom? And how was the T-virus created?
And now we're shifting this over to the origin of the corporation? How does that have any relevance to anything? We're trying to take down a corporation here. We don't need to know the layered backstory of the person in charge. And I kind of feel like these questions go against the general theme of Resident Evil. While there are evil individuals you can point to in the story, I always thought the point of corporation makes bioweapons, loses control, chaos ensues, was that it was a group effort in the name of profit. Resident Evil doesn't have a whole lot of things to say about society, but one of the few things you could glean from the first game was that capitalism can breed complacency through fear and bribery, and that corporations can sometimes disregard morality in order to make more money. The point wasn't supposed to be that we could point to one big bad man at the very top and say, it was him! He was the ultra evil man that decided he wanted to make monsters and kill everyone! The bottom line was that these things happened due to a faceless corporation's desire for profit, and now we all have to deal with the consequences. We never needed to know how the T-Virus was created. You're just going to be answering questions that nobody asked. Oh god, we only just now reached the end of the title crawl, and it has not set a good foot forward. We see a train traveling through a forest before getting a glimpse at a Final Fantasy antagonist who got lost and ended up in the wrong game. He sings opera and a bunch of slug monsters begin to infiltrate the train and devour everyone on board. Cut to Bravo Team's helicopter flying above the Arclay Mountains. Rebecca Chambers narrates a situation that we should all be familiar with by now as the camera gives us all clear shots of the various characters we saw dead or dying in Resident Evil 1. You don't need to worry about any of their names since we know how things turn out for them. All that matters here is Rebecca, sporting a slight redesign from how we saw her in the Resident Evil 1 remake. While she still has her same outfit from that game, her face has been slightly altered to accentuate her facial features. Got a little bit of mascara on her eyes to make them pop out more, and I generally feel like her face is softer and rounder. It's not really noticeable unless you look for it, but if I had to guess why this change was made, it was to make her look more cute and innocent, since the game wants to really play up her soft side in order to contrast with the secondary character we'll meet soon enough. After the helicopter has an engine failure and crashes, Bravo Team spots a surprisingly close by police van that has been toppled over, with dead police officers laying out of the vehicle. They seem to have been carrying a prisoner before meeting their untimely doom.
Court order for transportation. Prisoner Billy Cohen, ex-lieutenant, 26 years old. Court-martialed and sentenced to death July 22nd.
Those poor soldiers. They were good men just doing their jobs, and that scum murdered them and escaped.
Okay, I have some questions. First, where did this van come from? I thought the Arclay Mountains were extremely underdeveloped and thus shouldn't have any roads leading through it. Kinda hard to tell from these cutscenes, but it sure doesn't look like they're on a road. So why was this armored vehicle out in the middle of a forest? Second, the ooze sliding down the side of the truck I assume implies that these men were killed by the Leech monsters we saw earlier. I know they barely inspected the scene, but in what way could a bunch of leeches convincingly kill two men in a way that seems like it was done by hand? Third, are there no questions to be had about how the hell Billy would have managed to escape the back of the armored truck and managed to kill two men with presumably his bare hands? Fourth, isn't this a really big coincidence that all of this happens at the exact same time the Bravo team came by? This already seems like a really contrived way to explain Billy's presence in this specific location, and to build up expectations about him based on nonsensical conclusions from trained police officers. So Bravo team splits up in order to survey the area and potentially locate the crazed murder man, when Rebecca stumbles onto the same train we saw at the beginning, which I guess came to a comfortable stop all on its own. Despite the potential danger, Rebecca chooses not to radio in any sort of backup or help, or even let anybody know what she found or where she is. Which leads us to the beginning of the game. After a single room granting us time to get acquainted with the controls, Rebecca enters the next car only to be greeted by the spooky zombies, including the super secret quiet zombies that I guess open the door behind her while not making a noise. This is another one of those classic Resident Evil intros that places the player in immediate danger while hopefully making them panic as they try to understand the controls. What's interesting about this one is that the game is actually a lot more lenient than it seems. It takes a second to get your bearings, but if you realize that there is only one zombie coming at you from behind, you can easily get past it to progress forward because it's programmed to only take 3 shots before dying, as opposed to the other 2 zombies coming from the opposite direction. It's a little bit of subtle player guidance that I think deserves to be commended, even if it isn't clear where you should be going at first. After exploring a bit and picking up a key, Rebecca is caught off guard by the wanted man himself, Billy Cohen, who sneaks up behind her with a handgun.
So, you seem to know me. Been fantasizing about me, have you?
After introducing himself, he immediately leaves, somewhat dismissing Rebecca, who, despite her status as a member of law enforcement, seems completely incapable of actually arresting him.
I could shoot, you know.
After Edward tells her about the monsters roaming the mountains,
Zombies and monsters.
in a very quick encounter with some zombie dogs, Rebecca meets up with Billy once again, and he leverages a truce.
I don't need your help. I can handle this on my own. And don't call me little girl.
She goes upstairs and Rebecca quickly locates a man whose head immediately falls off upon meeting a cute girl. Here you have to either fight the monster off, which is way harder than it may seem, or just turn around and run away. Regardless of what you do, the creature splits apart and begins to envelop Rebecca, but thankfully Billy is there to shoot like 2 of the leeches, which somehow knocks them out or something. Then suddenly one of the leeches jumps up at nothing, and Billy jumps in front of it to shoot it. This is a really confusing scene. And it only gets weirder when the man in a dress we saw in the intro begins singing his little song to the leeches. Which also starts up the train, I guess, leading to Rebecca and Billy finally teaming up to survive this ordeal. So let's talk about all of what just happened here. This was a really crazy mixture of lazy writing, over-the-top and silly writing, and some genuinely good writing. Anything involving the setup to this location is pretty bad. The weird man singing to his leeches is pretty weird and I'm honestly enjoying it. But it's the character introductions that I think really shine here. From what we know about Rebecca in Resident Evil 1 and what we see of her here, she's clearly characterized as an ambitious but meek woman. When presented with a fugitive she's been ordered to apprehend, she tries to impose her authority onto him, but is easily dismissed. Then, when offered an olive branch, she still tries to stand her ground, only to be put in her place and saved by the man we had been told was a merciless killer.
Billy Cohen killed as many as 23 people. Over.
Which leads me to Billy Cohen. His calm but deep voice, large build, and apparent ability provide a clear contrast to Rebecca. The first impression we get of him is imposing, but his behavior shows that he might not be the crazy murder hobo that we were told he was. He clearly has a strong level of distrust with the police, and the handcuff stuck on his wrist at all times is a great reminder of why. But despite his personal feelings, he isn't an idiot, and is the first person to suggest working together with Rebecca. When told off, he lets her find out the hard way, but doesn't hesitate to actually save her. To put Billy's character extremely simply and very subjectively, he's fucking cool as hell. He radiates this badass energy and shows that he can back up his words with genuine skill, while not coming off as an asshole or moron. Seriously, compare this intro to somebody like Steve in Code Veronica. Both Steve and Billy have a distrust regarding the people that they meet, but Steve immediately bails while acting like an edgy teenager, while Billy very quickly turns around and works with the person he distrusted because it gives them both a greater chance of surviving. Both scenarios make sense when considering the character's backstory, but only one of these characters comes off as an immature child who willfully endangers both his own and the protagonist's life. And it leaves so much potential to see how these two are going to be interacting with each other. Will Billy turn and run the second that he gets an opportunity? Will Rebecca ever manage to get an upper hand on him? Can these two learn to trust each other beyond just surviving? We don't know yet, but it's a fantastic introduction to both of them. And now that we have control of both characters, this introduces the big gimmick to Resident Evil 0. Partner zapping. That's the informal buzzword given in the same vein as blast processing was for Sega, where, you know, it has an actual meaning, but it was given a snappy title to sound cool to the public. Basically, it just means that you can switch between two characters at all times without a loading screen. It was kinda used in Resident Evil 2 when referring to how one's first playthrough might affect the second when playing with a different character, but to me it feels more appropriate here since you are zapping from one character to another, and it creates a much more unique gameplay feature that affects the game's core design. Not to mention that at the time, this was really impressive. Like nowadays, I think with modern gamers, it's gonna go completely over their heads. This just feels like something any game like this would be able to do. But back then, and especially on the GameCube, this was wild, and it ended up offering some interesting ideas. First of all, both characters have their own inventory and health, and they both must be managed as if you're playing them alone. On top of that, both characters have unique traits and weaknesses. Sometimes this is a reasonable difference, like how Billy is tankier and has greater skill using his handgun. This is described by the game as a strong offense, which is super vague. Honestly, if you don't know what this means, how would you interpret it? Like what, is he shooting his gun harder than Rebecca or something? Does he make the bullets come out faster? Should I be playing as Billy anytime I'm fighting anything? Well, what it actually means is that Billy has a higher chance of critical decapitations, and he can fire slightly faster than Rebecca. Not that he inherently deals more damage to enemies or something. And Rebecca's unique traits are, I don't know, she's a cute girl. Her biggest unique trait is that she has a kit that allows her to hold chemicals within it. But that's not going to be relevant for another 30 minutes right now, so she's kind of just a worse character than Billy. What really rubs me the wrong way though is that they take skills that used to be unanimous among characters in previous games, and now restrict them to just one. Like how Billy is big and strong, so he can push heavy objects that cause Rebecca to go, "Aw, shucks," when she tries. Or how Rebecca is now the only one with the medical know-how to mix herbs. Both make sense, but I feel like taking previously inherent abilities away from a character is less interesting than giving them unique features that no one else could have done. It doesn't feel like you made Billy and Rebecca stronger, you just took away abilities from them and made them feel weaker. You weren't expanding the player's options, you're just spreading out what was already there and making it more restrictive, which isn't innovation. This isn't an inherently bad thing, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of new puzzles and problems that utilize this restriction, but I'd still argue it's missed potential. Give each character a unique weapon or something that only they can operate, like a weapon too big for Rebecca to handle properly. Or give Rebecca greater speed and mobility. Maybe she has a chance to dodge attacks or can weave through individual enemies or something. I'm just throwing ideas out, but something could have been done that wasn't just taking abilities away from specific characters. The second big thing that this dual partner system influences is that all throughout the game there are going to be puzzles and scenarios that require both characters to interact with each other. Sometimes this will just be trying to maneuver two characters at once during a fight. Other times it'll involve the characters being separated and having to interact through limited means. There's also the issue where health punishments can be greater if you try to solo everything. Not only is evenly distributing damage between characters a good way to make sure that one isn't instantly killed by a mob or series of aggressive attacks, but you're often dependent on helping and being helped out of grabs by zombies. Shooting them will quickly knock them off of you, leading to less damage taken, but not receiving help will deal a significantly higher amount of damage because shaking zombies is no longer the most important thing to do after getting grabbed. To make things even worse, Rebecca is really fragile in this game. She can get knocked down to red danger after just 1 or 2 bites. This pretty much guarantees that for your average player, splitting up Billy and Rebecca is a stinky doo-doo brain idea, and most of the game will consist of balancing the two's health, ammo, and inventory while keeping them safe together. Or else you're gonna have to hear your partner cry into their radio because a zombie is attacking them and they immediately lose all self-preservation skills the second you aren't in their brain. Another important thing to note is that you can manually put your partner in either attack or idle mode, though there is a bit of intricacy that the game doesn't explain to you. Idle is simple enough. Any character in this status will not fire at all, even when you're getting attacked. This can be important if you're looking to save ammo, or don't want the AI holding you back as they refuse to move forward without everything in the room being dead. Attack, however, has some unique factors depending on who it's on. If it's on Billy, he'll just start firing at anything that moves the second he gets his eyes on them. But when this is Rebecca, she will only aim at the enemies. She will not fire a shot until you start to, guaranteeing that Billy is the primary damage dealer and that she's only there for backup. It's a nice detail that shouldn't have been made a secret because it might turn some players off of having Rebecca on attack. And before going much further, let's get a lot of the necessities out of the way. This game carries over a lot from both the Resident Evil 1 remake and its HD remaster. Alternate controls have made a reappearance, and I'm not going to go on another 10-minute tirade about them again, especially since there are a lot of intricacies within that discussion that either I'm not doing a good enough job at explaining explaining, or people are failing to understand me. And then they leave a comment explaining to me what I already said in the video. Pretty much everything that I said in the previous video applies here too, with the most important point being that the game was designed for the slow and clunky tank controls, and replacing them with a more fluid alternate control scheme influences the difficulty of common encounters with enemies that were originally equally slow and clunky as you, along with some minor annoyances like the little spinnies you do when the camera changes and you're trying to redirect the character. Annoying stuff, but if the comments on my last video are anything to go off of, then many of you don't care, and this was likely a change that made classic Resident Evil games playable for you. But honestly, I don't find the controls to be that egregious here as they were in the previous title. Not because they're better or anything, but because I usually find myself choosing not to avoid enemies most of the time in this game for one reason or another. Most often, it's because strategically moving around zombies becomes a lot harder to do when you have two bodies to worry about. And that's not even considering if they're set on attack and are busy trying to shoot the enemies that you were explicitly trying to save ammo with by not killing. You are able to control the partner character manually by using the right analog stick on a controller, but honestly, good luck in dodging and weaving two characters at the same time. Also, the level design in this game is a lot more cramped than Resident Evil 1. I feel like you don't often have the space that you want in order to make accurate dodges. This obviously doesn't apply to every single room, but it does apply to quite a few. So for me personally, I wound up encountering less issues regarding the control scheme solely because the gameplay pressured me into a more offensive scenario, while the previous game allowed me more freedom. And that's not a good thing. It's not good to pressure players into one specific playstyle, unless you were going to be making that playstyle more intricate. And I don't think that standing still and shooting at zombies across the room really counts as intricate just because there's two of them now. On a much more positive note, another thing that's been carried over from the Resident Evil 1 remake is that this game is fucking gorgeous. Arguably more so than the previous game. The main thing that makes this a possibility is the incredible clarity and complexity of the pre-rendered backgrounds here. There are plenty of densely packed environmental details to appreciate, and I might even say that in specific areas, the scenery far surpasses the Resident Evil 1 remake. The key reason behind this is that there are far more animations being used as pre-rendered backgrounds. The introductory train sequence is always the example of this. The bouncing of the train as it moves, the way it influences all the liquids in the bottles, cups, and sinks, and the intense rainfall outside and through windows. It all looks absolutely fantastic. And I'm always blown away once you climb up onto the roof of the moving train, the way the trees are depicted speeding by, and the storm exploding into everything as it travels at dangerously high speeds. It makes it feel intense in a way that nothing in Resident Evil 1 Remake made me feel. And to top it all off, these backgrounds successfully got the upscaling that they deserve. So while the backgrounds in Resident Evil 1 were kind of blurry and the characters clearly sat on top of them when seen in high definition and not with YouTube's shitty compression, the backgrounds in Resident Evil 0 are crisp as hell. They get rid of that last lingering hint that this game came out 2 decades ago by having visuals so incredibly nice they look like they could have come out today. At least until you get to the pre-rendered videos, which are still kinda crusty. All that said, there are a few steps back I don't feel quite live up to the original art direction of the Resident Evil 1 remake. Namely is the use of camera angles, and the context within each shot. There isn't a whole lot that compares to the unique and interesting camera angles I brought up in the previous video. Nothing I would attribute the same level of striking visuals as the coffin hovering above the altar, or the eerie layout of Lisa Trevor's room. If you ask me, this is a matter of visual fidelity versus artistic quality. Resident Evil 0 clearly passes more bars in terms of how good the visuals can look. But the Resident Evil 1 remake succeeds when it comes to the actual content within those visuals, and that's not that big of a downgrade. Again, Resident Evil 0 looks great and should be appreciated, but I don't think it managed to surpass its predecessor. One thing it did manage to do better though is an updated feature that I believe was introduced here. In the Resident Evil 1 remake and most Resident Evil games up to this point, the way enemies would work is that if you left any kind of damage on them, whatever you had dealt would be erased once you walk through a door, excluding certain conditions like when you blow a zombie's legs off. Not only that, but if you alert a zombie to any new position, they would just return to their original spawn location once you left and returned to the room. This is a very gamey feature that added a bit of pressure to pick and choose when you wanted to kill something, because that is something you have to commit to, lest you waste ammo. It sorta had a gameplay purpose, but it never really made sense realistically. Now though, they finally changed it to make enemies retain the damage you dealt to them, as well as the last position that they had moved to. It's a small detail that often goes overlooked, but I think this would have set a nice precedent had this style of Resident Evil games continued. Alright, now we can get back to the game and resume where we left off when the train started up and carried Billy and Rebecca off to who knows where. We have just gotten control of two characters at once, and so what better of an opportunity to test this new design model? By immediately separating the two and sticking one of them in a room with no way to get out. Cool, I guess. Maybe this is to not overwhelm new players and give them a bit more time to adjust to the controls and mechanics. What sucks about this though is that the cutscene to trigger the separation between the two main characters is extremely sudden and unpredictable. A new player might want to consider everything that they just read and strategically pick the character they think is best for exploration or combat, but unless they know about this beforehand, they'll often be caught off guard. This might leave their tanky powerhouse character stuck in the kitchen with his thumb up his ass, while the fragile girl character is eating up all the health and potentially using more ammo. And spoilers, this sequence ends with a character cornered via a boss fight. This just seems needlessly punishing for new players. But hopefully that won't be a recurring trend or something. Ha 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 ha. But whatever, we're off on our own now, and if the player was given a chance to pick a character beforehand, they should probably go with Billy, as his larger health pool allows for more mistakes and his critical shots might save you some ammo. Whoever you end up choosing explores the train, which seems to be connected to some laboratory in the Arclay Mountains. A closed training facility is located there as well, and there was going to be an investigation as to whether it could be opened again. This information is located within a note that is stained with blood so certain parts are covered up, but they made the brilliant decision to have most of it typed out literally. This allows savvy players to piece together some hints as to the people involved in this investigation. But more importantly, it means that every person who reads this note aloud is legally required to read it exactly as it's written.
8 miles north of Raccoon City in the Arclay Mountains lies our company's management training facility. It was shut down years ago.
Now, we are conducting a preliminary study into the reopening of the facilities.
First investigation, the following orders are from William Barkin.
William Barkin.
That's a typo.
There's also a note that hints towards a new BOW type. Ooh, how exciting! A new monster stemming from a crustacean T-virus, which, just like every other animal in this game, causes an increase in size and aggression, all at the cost of a fragile shell. Now this is obviously a hint towards things to come, and it was described as a crustacean, so I bet we got some silly giant crab coming up in the future. It's a scorpion. Well, first of all, scorpions aren't crustaceans, they're arachnids, so I don't know why that was in there. But honestly, that's the least of our issues right now. Was this thing on the train? Yeah, they talk about researching it, but they didn't specify transportation, and we have access to every part of the train, and there's no giant scorpion storage or anything like that. Also, this thing isn't exactly subtle. It easily burst into one of the few train cars from the outside. So, I guess pick your poison. Which is less stupid to you? That the creature they happened to be researching got formed in the mountains and then jumped on the train? That no one noticed a giant scorpion on the train? That the scorpion was already on the train and no one at Capcom included a means to transport it? Or maybe it contracted the T-virus and grew on the train within the brief time period before Rebecca arrived and then politely left no influence of its presence before climbing on top of the train and sitting there for hours. Or maybe it's bad writing. Feels like that's a lot easier of an explanation than jumping through all these hoops to explain why everything makes sense when the writers probably never cared to begin with. Anyways, there's no reason to focus on the stupid story for this fight because the gameplay isn't much better. So for the encounter, we're placed in a massive dining car as the Scorpion, whose name is Stinger by the way, slowly approaches and corners us. As we learn from the note, Stinger here has a weak carapace around the head, allowing us to easily drill into his gooey brains. All it takes is a good shot with the hunting rifle we found in the previous room and we can start making progress on scrambling his insides. And from here, it's just a process of learning his patterns, of which there are like 3 you need to know, and will likely discover very quickly. He'll step forward, begin priming a charge with his tail, and if you successfully aim down and shoot his head, then he will immediately back off. He backs off with every successful shot to his head after his animation. And once you discover this, the fight is basically over. It's just an incredibly tedious process of waiting for his head to open up, shooting it, watching him back up, and then repeating it until it's over. This fight, it's exhilarating. I'm having so much fun, as you can tell. I get that you want to have an easier fight at the beginning of your game, but never before was it this easy to stand still, take no damage, and end up beating the boss. All this along with the most awkward camera angle ever that is in the perfect position to cut off your view from Stinger. In conclusion, this is a very underwhelming fight, and it plays just about as fun as it looks. But after this, we're finally able to rescue our teammate, which then leads to the rest of the train segment. Now, this part of the game isn't very complex, and I wouldn't liken it to the normal standard of Resident Evil level design. It's more like a tutorial segment, where the enemies aren't that difficult and the map is extremely easy to understand. I mean, it's a line. A train is just a line, with the only complexity being a second floor that opens up a single shortcut when you're basically done with the level. And similar to Resident Evil 3, where a good chunk of the game's layout was one big hallway, normal survival horde design won't exactly work here. The sequence of events kinda just has the player running back and forth a few times, and if you've already cleared a room, then there's no engaging threat by going back through them. The way the game gets around this is by having all the occupants on the train stow themselves under their seats. Basically, every time you walk through these coach areas, zombies crawl out from under the chairs to refill a room, along with the occasional jump scare like this freezer. Normally I would come down on this kind of design, but this is a short tutorial segment. I think it's just fine, and it leads to a fairly memorable location. Whenever I hear people talk about Resident Evil 0, there always seems to be a consistent key point, that the beginning of the game that takes place on the Ecliptic Express is generally fondly remembered and often considered the high point of the game. And to a degree, I can totally see that, even though this part ends up only taking up about 15% of the game as a whole. It's all fairly easy, but that's to be expected. The extent of things like puzzles involving multiple characters is pull lever with one and pick up a thing with another, which is like the bare minimum that you can do, but again, it's fine. Surprisingly, if there's any issues I have here, it's the context in which things are presented. As I mentioned before, the Scorpion existing at all is difficult to explain away, but you gotta have a boss fight. In order to get to the roof of a certain car, you have to acquire a hookshot, which seems like a really fucking stupid thing to have on a train. But there has to be impediments on your journey. There's also a common misconception about the hookshot, that only Rebecca can use it. And it kinda makes sense because there was a warning about weight within the hookshot's manual, so you would think that that would be coming into play, but no, it's actually just useless information. But I also believe that there are two contributing factors to this misconception. First is that the weight limit is written in kilograms, which Americans like me have no idea what that translates to. 80 kilograms? That's gotta be pretty low, right? That's gotta be like, what, 120 pounds? And the other is that most people don't realize how short Billy actually is. And then there's my favorite at the conclusion of the train sequence. After fully exploring the Ecliptic Express, Billy and Rebecca gain access to the locomotive. But right before they step in, we see some Umbrella goons who I guess either were on the train the whole time or just jumped onto it somehow. It's confusing, but not very important since they exist solely to be eaten alive by leeches that just hatched before we got here. These guys are heavily equipped to deal with threats, and they're eaten within seconds, so it kinda makes you wonder why Billy and Rebecca have survived to this point. And in between their deaths, we get to see Albert Wesker from Resident Evil 1 and William Birkin from Resident Evil 2, discussing their confusion regarding the sudden outbreak within their labs.
We must make sure no knowledge of this gets out. Destroy the train. Completely.
Billy and Rebecca need to stop this train before it crashes into its destination. This should be an extremely simple affair, but the worst engineers alive designed this train. They made it to where, in order to trigger an emergency brake, you need to have two individuals on the front and back of the train input basic math problems at the same time. It's honestly crazy that this train's downfall ended up being fucking zombies instead of horrible design choices. When it comes to the gameplay though, I think this is a pretty nice sequence where you have to pick one character to run all the way to the end of the train while avoiding all the enemies that you didn't kill, along with the newly zombified Edward Dewey, and yes, I did have to look up his last name. Kind of fun detail where if you picked Rebecca to run down the train, then you get a cutscene of her looking distraught at the sight of her zombified comrade.
Stop! Don't come any closer!
Then we get to the end of the train, and if you're like half the friends that I've seen play Resident Evil 0, then you will now reset the game in frustration because you didn't pick up the keycard of the engine car that is required to operate the brake system. I have no idea why this was included. There is no benefit in making the player pick up an unguarded key, and the only reason this seems to exist is to piss off players that were a bit too hasty in leaving the car. Like, if you miss this thing, that's just a guaranteed reset. You're not running back to that thing. I guarantee none of you are going to be running back. If you do have the keycard though, you get to do a simple puzzle where you have to add up to a specific number in exactly 10 inputs. And despite everything else, all my little criticisms, this is a really solid puzzle. Finally, I am rewarded for learning my multiplication tables in 4th grade! When they said I'd need it as an adult, this must be what they're referring to. So as long as you can add up numbers quickly, this puzzle will require just enough thinking to make it surprisingly engaging. And if you can't add numbers in your head, then it makes for a very amusing panic moment as the time continues to tick down. The game even prevents you from pausing to think it through. And if you were taking your time to solve this puzzle with complete accuracy, then you better not have taken too long because you have to do another one immediately after the first, this time without a screen to help you. The only thing that really disappoints me here is that the number you add up to isn't random. There's actually only 3 possible outputs, 36, 67, and 81. Could certainly have used some more prime numbers, because if anything's more likely to fry a person's brain, it's a number with no easy divisors. After the codes are successfully put in, the train slams on the brakes, but this is Resident Evil, which means that no vehicle ever manages to stop safely, and instead we get a campy collision where our protagonist managed to survive despite the immense danger. What's the counter at now? We got the tram in Resident Evil 3, the helicopter in Survivor, a plane in Code Veronica, and now this! I'm sure that'll be the last one, and no more are expected in the future. From here, Billy and Rebecca travel through some tunnels to emerge in an elaborate-looking building. The rug indicates that it's some kind of Umbrella research center, and in the center of everything, Rebecca sees a portrait of a familiar face.
The first general manager, Dr. James Marcus.
William Birkin and Albert Wesker are seen watching our heroes before rudely getting their movie night interrupted by the mysterious pretty boy we've seen singing in the rain. And then, of course, he starts singing again to create a man from a pile of goo. Needless to say, this mildly annoys Wesker. So it's kind of weird that we're seeing this as viewers. This isn't really Billy and Rebecca's problem. This feels more like a beef between Birkin, Wesker, and the pretty little choir boy.
10 years ago, Dr. Marcus was murdered by Umbrella. You helped them, didn't you?
It's kind of weird that our protagonists are basically entirely detached from the story besides trying to survive, while us as players are given all this extra information that they don't know. So this is the training facility that we had read about previously. It had been closed for a long time now, but was just getting into the process of getting renovated and opening up again. But it ended up succumbing to the same T-virus outbreak that had befallen the Spencer Mansion, which explains why it is now somewhat populated by the undead. The foyer we begin in is essentially going to be our base of operations. You see, the level design presented in this game's primary location takes yet another new approach on how everything is laid out. While the training facility has a very similar vibe to the Spencer Mansion, the layout here chooses to mostly forego the interconnected hallways that loop back into each other. Instead, here we have 3 rooms that can basically be combined into one big hub area, and these rooms branch out in every direction. The goal is to go down each of these branches individually, clear them out, gather resources, key items, and bring them back to the hub in order to resupply or store them for later. Now this might be a contentious opinion, but this layout is solid. I don't think it's anywhere near the quality of Resident Evil 1 and is probably a little bit worse than Resident Evil 2, but this layout isn't half bad for survival horror. Everything being connected to the place that you save and store items at turns each venture down a branch into a bunch of small discoveries where there's still danger around each corner, but you're never too far from recovery. The downside to this is that if you clear a branch and then never need to backtrack down it again, this can kinda be boring, as there isn't much thought into choosing who you kill or leave alive. You're never gonna run into them again, so why would it matter? And in case you're wondering, no, there aren't any Crimson Heads in this game, despite the fact that they're based on the same T-virus outbreak and these people got infected at about the same time. But it doesn't really matter because of what I just said. Many of those branches are just singular rooms that you're never going to have to return to again, which means for a majority of these branches, you only have to worry about 2 runs through it. The first one where you run to the end, and then when you run back. Unless Crimson Heads were going to be getting up within a minute of dying, then most players wouldn't even run into them. Basically, the level design of the training facility is a simplification for most survival horror maps. This makes it decent, but unremarkable and fairly forgettable. The biggest problem with it though is that I feel like there isn't a whole lot of iconic rooms within it. Resident Evil 1 had a ton of memorable rooms, with puzzles and traps, all in theme with a decadent mansion. While Resident Evil 0 is clearly a training facility, it kinda gives off the same posh vibe Resident Evil 1 did, except not as unique or interesting because this is our second time around. In fact, most people who casually play this game just describe the training facility as a mansion. Even though it's not a mansion, but it basically looks like one. This is why I think so many players end up losing enthusiasm after we get off the train. A train is such a bizarre and distinctive location to explore, and getting off that just to go here feels like a massive step down. But at the same time, I'm not going to argue that the entire game should have been on the train. Not only would the train have to be massively updated with way more content, but the linear structure of the train would be antithetical to good level design. Could you imagine how many times you'd have to run back and forth on a map like that? Hell, we already had to do a lot of that for the brief time we were on it. I think making it any bigger would be questionable. It almost feels like Resident Evil 0 was in a losing position to begin with, but I think that'd be discrediting the capability of imagination. I think I'd certainly love to at least see an attempt at it. Anyways, now that I have explained the facility's layout, it's time to stress just how important those hubs are. Not only are you going to be seeing them quite a lot, but you're going to absolutely destroy the feng shui of that room by leaving all your crap strewn across the floor. You see, Resident Evil 0 makes the absolutely baffling gameplay design choice to remove item boxes. But where do I store all my stuff, you might be asking? Why, you just dump it on the ground. For the first time ever, you are given the ability to simply drop an item where you're standing, as opposed to it being stuck in your inventory until used or put into a box. On one unusually small hand, yay! On the other, much more conventionally sized hand, oh no, there goes a level of survival horror complexity. Your average player doesn't think about this, but there was a gameplay purpose to not being able to remove items just anywhere. It made you more considerate when it comes to what you're putting inside your pockets. This can sometimes lead you to being unprepared, make you forego specific items that might help you in the future, or force you to go back through potentially dangerous areas, which will at the very least cost you a bit of time, and maybe even ruin your good ranking. But god damn it, I know everyone at some point has had that feeling of, why the hell can't I just put this stupid herb down to pick up this key that I'm gonna use in like 2 seconds? This is a change that I think a lot more casually inclined players enjoy, but the fact is that this system is just so much worse than a simple storage box. I have never incorrectly positioned myself over a box that I felt like I should be interacting with, but the game tells me I'm not. I've never had to worry about placing an item just off screen, so that I completely lose track of it and have to wildly click around to find it. There's a room near the end of the game that has this problem really bad because there's a fucking bed right under the camera. You know what else I've never done with a storage box? Fill it up! I don't even think that's possible! Somehow, despite having an entire goddamn room to store shit in, you're only allowed so many items on the ground. This game has to read the location of items you touch on the map, which is a pretty nice feature, but it can only handle rendering so many points, and this leads to an item limit. Talk about suffering from success, now I have to purposefully move to a different room just to drop off a few items. And possibly worst of all, there is no centralized storage point for every location in the game, the same way that all your items are available at all storage boxes. This means that if you want to make sure that all your stuff is carried over, you are going to have to manually run over to them, pick them up, and then drop them off at wherever you're wanting to keep them. We are already having to deal with that in this point of the game. Any item you interacted with on the train now has to be picked up again outside of this burning hellscape of a crash, and be taken into the facility just to make sure everything is together, including the hook shot. Huh, that's weird. And as one final twist to the nipple, the game has also decided that any item you didn't interact with on the train just gets poofed out of existence after the crash. So if you saw some herbs and said, well, I don't have inventory space for them and I don't have a box to put them in, so I'll just leave them be for now, and then moved on, then I guess fuck you. Oh, you think we're done complaining about the items in inventory? Nah, we got more. Now that we technically have 12 inventory slots, 6 on each character, the game wants to compensate for that by making several items take up 2 slots. Pretty much any big weapon will eat up your pocket space, as well as specific key items, namely that goddamn hookshot. Do we need that thing? Can I just leave it? It's such a pain to drag around. It'd be really nice to know if I'm gonna need it later. Once all of these things are considered, it's often easy to feel like you actually have less inventory space than normal. A big weapon taking up 2 slots, ammo for that weapon, maybe some health and a key item. Yeah, you're already at 5 out of 6 slots. And that's not even considering if you want your characters to still be carrying around their pistols and the ammo for that. There's not a whole lot of room to collect more stuff. And you'd never know when a character is going to get left alone, so I guess you better keep them both prepared at all times. All of these combine together to make Zero one of, if not the most inventory-focused Resident Evil games ever. You will be moving, dropping, collecting, distributing, combining, and using items in this game more than ever before. I hope you enjoy the inventory screen, because you're going to be looking at it a lot. This is something that heavily brings down the gameplay for me. It's tedious, and if any of these changes were made for the better, they are immediately overshadowed by the things that make it way worse. Let's get back to a normal playthrough of the game and see if it manages to pick itself up despite those setbacks. Billy and Rebecca's goal is simply to get out, so time to explore all of these rooms. As I said before, they all consist of branches that we slowly have to unlock and explore. So we can knock out some of the simpler rooms first. Upstairs we have a door that leads to a single room. See, this room is very funny, because there's nothing in it besides a note and a key item. The second you grab the key item, the room explodes with crows, but you can just run immediately out the door and you never have to go into that room again. It only existed for a jump scare. It's a jump scare room. Alright then. Another room to make note of is this bathroom. Seeing as it's on the first floor, it often would be one of the first choices made by a new player. Inside, you'll find some gasolines and bottles which can be combined to create Molotov cocktails. These are new weapons introduced for this game. They work decently well on most enemies, but they're best used when saved for one specific enemy. The Leech Man. Now officially, this enemy is known as a Mimicry Marcus, due to the way that they seem to be a large group of leeches imitating the co-founder of Umbrella, James Marcus. But similar to Mr. X's name, the Resident Evil fandom seems to have taken to calling them Leech Man. And you'll know when you find one because the second that they spawn in, you will get the loudest, most intense theme music ever blaring through your speakers. Whenever you first encounter one of these fellas, they'll just stumble around in their Marcus form, but upon being damaged enough, they'll explode into a much simpler form. Here they look more like a ragdoll as they move around like they barely are able to keep their form together. They have an almost silly demeanor as their poorly formed body flips and flops every which way. But don't let that fool you. These guys are an actual threat. These are one of the most dangerous enemies in Resident Evil so far. Not only are their attacks fairly quick, but they have some incredible range as their limbs stretch across entire hallways. To make things worse, most weapons are noticeably ineffectual on them. It'll take quite a few shotgun rounds before you successfully blow off its upper body, and even then you're going to need to avoid the very damaging explosion afterwards, as the remaining leeches use self-destruct in order to take you down with them. And as one final treat, if you manage to survive all of that, then now you need to avoid getting sucked off by too many leeches that now infest the entire room you're in. Without the proper knowledge about them, leechmen are incredibly deadly and should be avoided at all costs. But when push comes to shove, there is a way to take them out as effectively as possible. Molotov cocktails, as well as most fire-related ammunition, seems to be their weakness, though this is never really hinted at in the game, besides the reddish coloration that covers them once hit. Is it an association thing, like how in Metal Gear Solid 3 you burn off leeches? Or is the game just expecting you to discover this yourself by using the super limited weapon on the super hard mini-boss enemy? I don't know, maybe I'm stupid. But if you're a new player who ended up using all your Molotovs on zombies or something else, then I guess you can eat shit! It only takes about 3 Molotovs to take down a Leechman, and when you do, they don't explode all over you anymore. Sounds easy enough, except throwing Molotovs is kinda clunky, the Leechman doesn't really react when taking damage, and each toss has an annoying recovery time, even when using Rebecca, who recovers from it faster. So even if you do come equipped, there's a decent chance you're gonna get slapped or hugged regardless. Overall, the Leechmen are pretty punishing, but especially to new players who might not be expecting their bulkiness or aren't aware of their weakness. Luckily for us though, they have one key flaw in their design. So there we are, cornered by the Leechman in the bathroom, fully equipped with our gas and bottles. All we have to do is combine the two and we can quickly run right by him while he's busy shitting himself as Dr. Marcus. Yeah, a majority of these Leechmen are in rooms that only require a brief bit of time from the player, meaning that in most scenarios you can just run right by them and leave without ever having to engage with the Leechman or even entering the room ever again. Once again, this is a technique that makes replaying the game significantly easier, but you wouldn't know any of this on your first playthrough, which leads to a lot of new players getting really frustrated by Leechman encounters that they might not have needed to even fight in, or in some cases might not have needed to trigger whatsoever. For instance, that bathroom is entirely optional, but the hallway outside of it has a really weird spawn condition, where the first time you simply check the door at the end of the hall to see what it needs to even be opened, then a Leechman will suddenly spawn at the entrance, guaranteeing that you'll have to encounter him again later on. If you used up your health and ammo fighting those guys only to basically get no progress, then you might as well just reload a save right then and there, and that sucks! I have no idea why this game wants new players to be so miserable. Moving on, our two characters stumble upon a key trapped within a cage for some reason. Upon sending Rebecca to retrieve it, a giant centipede bursts forth and captures her. And instead of biting her or eating her, it chooses to just give her a big hug as it runs around in a circle. This is the Centurion boss fight, and I am using that term extremely loosely. It's like, imagine the fight with Yawn in Resident Evil 1, except take away any freedom of movement for the monster. Centurion will crawl around a predetermined path on repeat until the player kills it, which means that as long as you don't stand in its way or deliberately walk into it, this fight is trivial. It's incredible they actually did it. They said, how can we make a boss fight that is easier and more tedious than Stinger? And they actually pulled it off. The only challenge presented here is that you didn't equip Billy with the ammo needed to demolish Centurion's bulky health pool. Like if for whatever reason you left it on Rebecca, then too bad for you. It's weird how often I'm having to say that, right? That's not just me. This game is so fucking unpredictable and punishing to people who are unprepared because they don't know what's gonna happen next. And it's not even a good boss fight when you are prepared. I really wish I could start being nice now, but then we get to the part of the game that is just solving puzzles and things just aren't getting better. In this area, these are some of the most milquetoast, forgettable, and easy puzzles yet. Arguably on par with Resident Evil 2's puzzles, which I heavily regret not going harder on in my video of that game. But that game at least had better features to help carry it despite its flaws. Aside from the expected get item and bring it to another place to get another item, or read note to immediately know the answer, type stuff that we're expecting in a game like this. We also get such head scratchers as, how do you open this door? Could it have something to do with the painting right next to the door that clearly shows a man lighting a candle? Maybe that's not enough of a puzzle for you. How about the giant chess set? The game appears to have ended in a checkmate. Okay, maybe we need to understand the rules of chess and reposition the new board composition to end in a checkmate. Or we can just copy exactly what's on the small chessboard. Who needs to think when you can just copy another person's work? Fine, okay, what about the conference room puzzle? Here you have to associate numbers and letters on a photo with their real equivalent. And the hardest thing about this one is just figuring out what direction is north and south. So, not very hard at all. Oh, but you do have to split up your party to press buttons back to back. Haha, now we're utilizing that zapping system to its greatest potential. You know, now that I'm retracing my steps through the game, maybe there was a good reason to think that the game nosedives right after you get off the train, beyond just the banality of the locale. The beginning of the training facility has some of the worst design choices in Resident Evil that slow the game down to a crawl. The bosses and puzzles aren't very fun, and the inventory management begins to get out of hand here. There are also several small annoyances, like how we can finally get to utilize Rebecca's chemical kit. You find a green chemical that you can hold on to, and you have the option to use it on yourself at any point. And as a green chemical, you can guess what it emulates the properties of. That's right, a blue herb! Yeah, the thing that only heals you from poison. Hey, fun fact, this game only has one enemy capable of poisoning you, and they only show up for 2 rooms in the entire game, right alongside some blue herbs. So yeah, Rebecca's chemical kit might as well be useless. It only exists to solve a few puzzles, and it's really not a boon to her whatsoever. You know what else I hate? This room. It's a dumb, small complaint, I know, but here's where 2 unique enemies for the game, the plague crawlers, fall down from the ceiling. Honestly, not a whole lot to say about them as an enemy type. They're giant crickets or some kind of generic bug that exists as an intermediary enemy just above zombies. They aren't much of a threat and can be easily taken out with any weaponry above a handgun, so I'd argue their generic designs make them one of the most forgettable Resident Evil monsters, unless you specifically have a fear of bugs or something. But there's this room, and it's kind of awkwardly set up, so you have to be standing down there with the buggos in order to deal damage to them, even though it feels like you should have a clear shot from them on the platform. Yeah, that's cheesing because they can't get up there, but then maybe they shouldn't have designed the room to look like that to begin with. And besides, if you want to talk about cheesing, then that wouldn't even be the most egregious example. After you kill Centurion, his boss room becomes full of plague crawlers, but in an oversight so obvious I can't believe it wasn't fixed, they are, for whatever reason, incapable of walking in front of the staircase that leads back into the foyer. That means you can just sit here and unload into all of them with absolutely no threat to yourself. I don't know what to say. This is embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for the bugs. Similar to Resident Evil 1, the story of the game also kinda just stops progressing for a bit in order to allow the game to happen. The only thing to really talk about are the files spread throughout the facility, and since this game is leeching so much of its themes from Resident Evil 1, of course we have to have a no longer original Itchy Tasty Diary ripoff. You know the drill. Scientist says everything sucks, gets infected, talks about being itchy and or tasty, and then his writings turn into barely legible scribblings. This time calling for his mommy. It's fine, I just think that these have become predictable at this point, so I don't have a whole lot to say about it. What actually holds some importance are the diaries of the staff, including James Marcus himself. They go into brief detail about Wesker and Birkin's time here at the training facility. They were both hard-working prodigies, and as a means to encourage them to work even harder, Marcus told his staff to purposefully pit them against each other. And now, thanks to the game directly telling us that Birkin and Wesker assisted in killing Marcus, it's pretty easy to see where this is going, even though we aren't even halfway into the game yet. Besides that, the only other thing to note is that Marcus, alongside Spencer, helped discover the progenitor virus that was hinted at in the Resident Evil 1 remake, and it eventually became the T-virus thanks to Marcus's character-defining obsession with leeches. After some creative differences, Marcus made it his goal to take control away from Spencer by presenting the T-virus at the next director's meeting. But there have been people snooping around his research. I'm sure he can get Birkin and Wesker to figure out who's causing trouble. Those two seem super reliable and not at all fueled by cruel indifference to morality and loyalty. This'll go great. So back to our protagonists. Rebecca is shoved through a hole in the wall to discover a medieval torture room. Sure, I guess it isn't more out of place here than it was when it was in Code Veronica. And finally, we're back to a decent puzzle. It's nothing special, just flipping switches up and down to add or remove a certain amount of power, but it will make you think for a second, and that's all I can ask for. After that's completed, Brunette Sephiroth unleashes his inner alpha wolf.
I have already claimed this place for myself, which means you are trespassing. And I am very territorial.
Okay!
He then sends some monkey mania towards Rebecca, which results in her falling into a hole and leaving her fate up in the air. But first, we need to check in with Birkin and Wesker, who are busy walking around the Resident Evil 2 lab and discussing what to do about this whole Dr. Marcus situation.
If the old conspiracy against Dr. Marcus is revealed, Mr. Spencer's career will be over. Not to mention ours, too.
While Birkin does plan on blowing up the research facility at some point, the secondary purpose of the scene is to have the characters lead into their respective games. Now that Umbrella is stinky, I will go home and do a Resident Evil 1. But that is crazy! I need more time to do a Resident Evil 2! That is so cool, have fun with that. Cut back to Billy, and as you can tell by the music, things have gotten very serious. Rebecca is stuck in a hole somewhere, and Billy is the only one who can rescue her. Even worse, this is a key juncture similar to Resident Evil 1 when you return to the mansion and it's all filled up with hunters. Except this time it's all full of monkeys! These are Eliminators, which is the coolest fucking name ever, and it got put onto these little shits that look like they could be punted like a football. Don't let the looks deceive you though, because I feel like everyone I've ever talked to about this game hates these guys. Okay, so what if we took a hunter, made them way smaller and kinda harder to hit, and arguably more agile as they jump off of walls and grab onto you? Those are Eliminators. Their small size means that you'll see less of them as they charge to attack you since they're on screen for less time, which in turn means that the time you'll have to react is heavily reduced. These guys also almost always show up in groups. Carelessly running forwards into them could easily lead to a gang attack where you get stun locked to death. But you know what? I'm gonna put on my little contrarian cap in favor of positivity for once. I think that Eliminators get a harsher rep than they deserve. These guys are definitely annoying and somewhat difficult to kill, but just about as much as any hunter. Both are fast and deal heavy damage, but they can both be taken out in the exact same manner, simply stun locking them in place with a powerful enough gun to knock them down. I think the reason that these guys end up on everyone's shit list is similar to many other moments in the game. They are a beginner trap. Their small size might make you think that they could be stunned or killed after only a bit of damage, but that's incredibly misleading. These guys can sometimes take more shotgun rounds than a hunter, and they'll walk right through a handgun's barrage. So if you saw this cute little monkey and pulled out your handgun to take care of it, then you will very quickly learn that that was a bad move. And you know, it doesn't help that this entire segment just really sucks in general. See, when presented with the opportunity to separate Billy and Rebecca, it isn't unexpected for a new player to load up Rebecca with strong weapons since they might be anticipating a boss fight or something on the other side of the wall. But instead, it ends up being Billy who's going to be fighting for his life against an army of banana munchers. But whatever, let's go get Rebecca. Now that she's turned on the power, we can easily get to the room she fell in, and that's odd. I'm not able to just rescue her. Oh, I probably need to kill the monkeys, of course. Well, that's gonna take a chunk of my health and ammo, but whatever, it's a learning experience. Now that that's done, I'll just... Wait, what? Oh, no, 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 no! She's not here! She's on the goddamn floor below us! This is one of the cruelest beginner traps in the game, and possibly one of the most questionable design choices in all of Resident Evil. Yes, I know that right before you go after Rebecca, the game shows you on the map her location, but not only is it in a new location you probably don't recognize the path to, but at no point in any of the cutscenes does the game make it clear that she has fallen to an entirely separate floor below that also has a giant death pit to fall into. So, a new player, reasonably assuming they know where to go, will run into this room full of Eliminators, waste health and ammo killing them, and then realize that coming here was completely pointless and they need to turn around and run through the entire map just to get to Rebecca. I have seen this happen so many times, and I have no idea why it would be included. Why did you have a useless room full of difficult enemies just to punish confused players? Was that intentional? Did they think it was clearer than it was? Were there no complaints during testing? And that isn't even considering all the ropes and shit hanging around in this dungeon that could easily be used to help her, or maybe even having Billy jump down the hole in a more controlled fashion to allow him to land on the floor below. I have no doubt that this is a reason why Eliminators frustrated so many. And sure, the player is at fault to some degree here. The game gave you the information, but you didn't properly realize it. But surely you can see that the entire situation could have been clearer. This was such a common occurrence that the game must be doing something wrong if it's confusing this many people.
Everyone is damaged.
Oh, fuck me.
What?
You gotta... Don't you need the grappling thing?
What the hell? What do you want from me?
I'm trying to. How do I... Wait, what do I do?
You can see Rebecca down below. She looks like she could fall at any moment. I've got to save her before it's too late. Huh? I got rope. What? Am I supposed to be saving you with an item in particular?
Feels like she could fall at any moment. You've got to save her before it's too late. How the fuck do I save her?
Okay, so apparently I didn't go as far as I should have. I forgot that she falls down.
Wait, this isn't the right room?
That was a small collection of some of the biggest YouTubers that I found after searching for Resident Evil 0 playthroughs. So I wasn't relying on just my own anecdotes, I wanted to see how many YouTubers made this same mistake. The answer was all of them. Excluding people who had already played the game or were knowledgeable about it, every single Let's Player had made the same mistake. I think it's safe to say that something went wrong here. After shooting a bunch of monkeys, Billy saves Rebecca's life. And that's right when she gets a call on her radio from Enrico, asking if she's managed to find Billy yet, which just... what? Okay, so she's had a functional radio and clearly has contact with her superior this entire goddamn time. Why hasn't she called for backup? Or any kind of help? Or even just shared information about what she had discovered? Secondly, the first thing Enrico fucking asks her about is if she found an escaped convict. Excuse me, are you not aware of anything that is taking place right now? Do you somehow not know that there are monsters everywhere and that one of your team members is dead? Do they have radios? Some of them don't die until Resident Evil 1, so they should still be on the line. Why don't we hear from them? Why is this game's story so terrible? But hey, Billy and Rebecca's relationship had potential, though it has gone kinda silent since the train segment. But now we finally have an opportunity to glimpse into these characters' views of each other and see what Billy's backstory is. Let's see.
I need to know the truth. Did you kill 23 people? I'm not going to judge you. I just want to know the truth.
So Billy was sent into Africa with a group of soldiers in order to intervene with a civil war. But their landing was so far away from the target and the journey was so strenuous on the soldiers that most of them ended up dead in one way or another. By the time they got to the location, there were only 4 men left. And it turned out that this was a local village, not a guerrilla base. Despite that, the squad's leader decided that they couldn't leave empty-handed.
Do it!
So did you execute those innocent people?
Forget about it. Doesn't matter anymore. That was then, this is now. Besides, you said you wouldn't judge me.
Okay, I get that what he's trying to say is that it doesn't matter whether he did or didn't participate in the massacre because he's going to be found guilty regardless, but it honestly seems kind of suspicious to not at least say you did nothing wrong to the only person in the world who trusts you, especially since this entire story is hinging on her believing you and not immediately assuming that you're a crazy person who made all of this up. Who is this tough guy act for? If there's no possible outcome besides being seen as guilty by the government, you could at least be honest with your partner in a situation where you could die at any moment. More importantly though, this entire scene feels detached from everything else that we learned in the game. Billy already rescued Rebecca once, so this wasn't exactly the big turnaround moment where Rebecca finally realized that Billy was a good guy, and Billy's backstory kinda comes out of nowhere. His backstory has no connection to Umbrella or any of the other plot points currently present in the story, and it doesn't exactly tell us anything new about the character that we didn't already know. Whoa, Billy's a good guy with a tough exterior? Wow, it's like I already knew that from the first 30 minutes of playing this game. This is context without substance. We learn a bit of history about these characters, but it doesn't reveal any information about the characters themselves. And considering the potential that the story had in the beginning, this is really disappointing. But whatever. The cutscene ends quite suddenly after that with no further discussion. Right after that scene, we get to go right into another puzzle. And this time, I think it's pretty great. It's not a very difficult one. It all makes perfect sense once you figure out the solution, but it's something that takes a bit of careful deduction in order to solve. It's the animal statue puzzle. Here, you are presented with a variety of creatures. Each has their own brief description. You obviously are needing to light them up in a specific order, but for what? I think most people begin with the food chain, but that idea will quickly fall apart. Like, okay, there's a deer, and that's a herbivore, and it probably gets eaten by a wolf, but wait, what eats a wolf? The lion? Wait, then where does the horse come into this? Yeah, that's not gonna work. So it must be something else. And that's where one's literacy skills are put to the test. Read each description carefully. They all have specific wording. Not only that, all but one reference escaping or attacking something else. So we get to start on the one that doesn't reference anything but itself, the deer. Now, a lot of animals here could take down the deer, but only one specifically references its defining trait. The wolf has sharp wit to take down a horned beast. From this point on, it's just a game of word association. Cunning is a synonym for wit, and the horse can outrun any cunning. And if the horse's deal is running, then the lion makes sure nothing escapes, etc. This is a genuinely surprisingly solid puzzle that makes perfect sense in retrospect. I find the amount of people it stumped to be kind of respectable. Not that that's the only good outcome, to make a puzzle your average person doesn't understand. I would like to remind everyone that the clock gem puzzle in Resident Evil 3 is straight convoluted garbo, but that the goal is to make a fair and difficult puzzle that actually makes people think, as opposed to mindlessly copy information or flip switches until you win. Really cool stuff, Resident Evil 0, good job, you get 1 gold star and 5 minutes to play in the sandbox at recess. Right after this, we get a chance to see some old friends. Hunters return in this game, and they play nearly identically to the hunters in Resident Evil 1. I say nearly identically because I think I managed to figure out the answer to my question regarding their behavior in my Resident Evil Remake video. See, the hunters here have the same basic moveset to worry about, but their behavior is slightly altered. They're more aggressive in this game, and seem more prone to ganging up in groups, which is honestly a behavior that I see in everything in this game. The Eliminators, the zombies, the plague crawlers, everything in this game seems to have reduced that subtle grace period that all enemies had in the Resident Evil 1 remake. You know, where you'd get hit, but then the other enemies wouldn't immediately pile onto you, instead they'd wait a second to allow you to catch your breath. This is a mechanic that is added in order to prevent getting stun locked to death, which unless you're playing a fighting game, I think that most of us would consider stun locks on the player to be a bad thing. So I think the question I made regarding whether hunters will only do their decapitation attack when an orange caution for health is answered by this game. I think the wiki that I took that information from basically just grouped Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 0 together because they are so similar. But I can't go into the code to prove any of this, so I'm not expecting anything to change based on my word alone. And besides, this is just me speculating on the game's mechanics. Even if there wasn't a literal change in the code that made enemies more aggressive, the level design would probably make up for it. Rarely in Resident Evil 1 would you be put up against multiple hunters, and if you were, they were generously spaced out. Here, the rooms are way more cramped and full of enemies, so they offer more of a chance to slip up and fall into a hit stun cycle. Anyways, besides that, there isn't a whole lot to note with the hunters here except for the first location that you encounter them. I kinda like the build up and how it forces the player to initiate everything. You find this area covered in claw marks, clearly used to test battle capabilities of BOWs, and you have to maneuver one character through these electronically controlled gates. Once you reach the key item, you have to engage the battle sequence manually yourself. still unaware of what monster might be coming for you. It adds a nice bit of tension, even if the game provides the acid rounds that you need to immediately demolish the hunters. This whole thing would be a pretty neato fan service moment if hunters hadn't showed up in the last 3 mainline games, but there are touches of horror here to appreciate regardless. But that's too much niceness, too much praise. Don't you know it's a critic's job just to shit on everything all the time? Let's get away from anything remotely good and pull up some real bile. Just the worst of the worst. Let's go to church. Rebecca and Billy manage to get the items that they need in order to operate a needlessly complex observation elevator, and this leads them to an old church behind the training facility. After using one character to open the door, the other one will encounter a giant bat, and this bat is named Infected Bat. What the hell? Everyone else got cool nicknames. Stinger, Centurion, Plague Crawlers. Why is this guy so lame? Maybe he pissed off the devs or something, because here we are! We made it! The lowest of lows! This boss is going down in my book as possibly the worst thing that Resident Evil has ever done. The infected bat has an erratic looping behavior. First, it flies around in an unpredictable pattern, meaning that if you're going to shoot at it, you need to either be using a handgun for the hit scan effect, or you need to be using a shotgun for the spread. Then, after a few seconds of flying, the bat will swoop in to either scratch at you, or if you're unlucky, pick you up and drop you in a different location. So far, it isn't that bad. Keeping your back against the wall and mashing the re-aim button will likely allow you to keep track of him and shoot him once he gets close. Standing still in the corner isn't exactly fun, but fine. The real problem comes in the second phase of this fight. A bunch of normal-sized bats will begin to swarm in, and they all start nibbling on you. The damage they deal isn't even the worst part, though. It's that now they're making your auto-aim work against you. Raising your gun or pressing the re-aim button might redirect you to the boss, or it might redirect you towards the dozen of small bats flying in every direction. After aiming, you can try to reorient yourself manually to your target, but good luck with that because it's slow as hell and the big bat is likely already on you and about to toss you around. Oh, and don't bother trying to kill all the smaller bats. Not only are they just as hard to target, but they end up respawning anyway. Your only goal should be killing the big bat as fast as possible, before all your health is whittled away. This is a fight that should have never made it past the concept phase. No part of Resident Evil survival horror gameplay is made for an encounter like this. It's so difficult to line up shots with your enemies when your perspective is in the corner of a room, and it makes it feel like shots sometimes go right through him, which is why using things like the grenade launcher can be so wasteful if you don't know what you're doing. The smaller bats constantly picking at you, and the big bat wasting a few seconds of your life as it drags you around, almost make it seem like the fight is deliberately designed to get on your nerves. This isn't even about difficulty. Yes, I know that there is a technique that you can use in order to end the fight in a few seconds, but there's no reason to assume that a new player will understand that, and engaging with the fight on its own terms seems to me like the best way to genuinely critique something. Every aspect of this fight is annoying, even when you know what you're doing. Simply put, this is just a really bad fight, and possibly even the worst boss that we have seen yet. But it's dead. We can move on. I don't know what exactly we needed from this church, but if we just... What? What do you mean, Gabe? I need something? What do I need? Oh no! Double whammies back to back. Anything to make the player stop wanting to play. You silly little gamer, you! Didn't you know that you needed that obnoxiously large hookshot that fell out of the train with you? If not, then I hope you enjoy your trip down the newly constructed Monkey Avenue. And here's a little bonus for those of us who played this on the original GameCube release. Whenever you make the transition between the observatory and the training facility, you actually had to swap out the discs. As if this process wasn't annoying enough. It'll surely give you enough time to think about why you're even playing this goddamn game to begin with. Okay, run back, kill the monkeys, get to the train, grab the hookshot, run back to the church, now we can progress. Do I still need it? Can I drop it now? How long do I need to take it with me? It takes up 2 inventory slots. Why are you doing this to me? This finally leads us into the second area of the game, the laboratory. And this area is special because while it isn't very big, it does consist of one big gimmick. For almost the entirety of this section, both characters will be split up on different floors. We got a brief taste of this on the train, but now you get the whole helping. And you know what that means? There is gonna be a lot of staring at this elevator. Oh, and you better have brought that hookshot with you because you needed it again right away. Awesome. The laboratories involve one character going upstairs with the hookshot while the other waits down below, their only connection being a service elevator to send items back and forth to each other. And you better have made damn sure that whoever goes up has all the weaponry they'll need, because once you go up there, you can't go back down for some reason, and the elevator is too small for something like a shotgun or a grenade launcher. While exploring around, our main characters stumble onto an old photo of Marcus in his graduation, and through that, they make the assumption that the weird Leech man with the voice of an angel that they saw for like 2 seconds inside of the train has to be his son or grandson.
Judging from the age, that guy could be Marcus's son or grandson.
Which puts a few pieces together for the audience, but likely raises even more questions for Billy and Rebecca. We also find the development history of Marcus's leeches and... Oh, come on. You're not even trying. Who is that for? Is the average Resident Evil fan's intelligence that low? This just reeks of focus testing. Were there a bunch of game testers that got so confused by this puzzle that the devs felt like they had to highlight the answers for the player? April 30th? What the fuck is going on? The book says Marcus's leeches were hungry little fellas, and that they began to develop greater intelligence to the point of even imitating Marcus himself, which leads into the mimicry Marcuses that we keep running into. Besides those story details, there isn't much more to talk about within the laboratory segment. This cage is the same size as a human. I wonder what they were raising in here, they say right after killing 2 hunters that clearly just burst out of the cage. Overall, this part of the game is where it becomes clear that this is not gonna get much better. Extremely simple puzzles that are read out to you, tedious inventory management on the service elevator, limited story progression with a lot of repeated information that we already know, mainly about Marcus having his leeches, and... oh god damn it. At least it isn't too far back, but do I need it now? Look, you've done this to me 3 times already. I really don't want to run back, but the hookshot takes up so much space. Is it supposed to be like a key, where you discard it after you're done? Please just tell me. Now, there's no way for you to actually know this while playing the game, but this actually is the last time that you need the hookshot. There's no way that you'll know that though, because there's no discard function for it. So there's a good chance that you'll spend the rest of the game in perpetual fear that you'll have to run back and get the hookshot. There really shouldn't be any defense of this. There's a reason why the hookshot is so hated among Resident Evil players. This thing plays with your emotions and your expectations about how Resident Evil items work, on top of being incredibly annoying to lug around and taking up 2 inventory spaces when that could have been better served with other things. The hookshot is terrible, and is a contributing factor to why many people don't like this game. It ends with Rebecca and Billy powering up a tram to escape to who knows where. But oh no, the 2 get jumped by a super sneaky eliminator, and it takes Billy out by sending him over the railing, which incurs yet another scenario where if you had your best health and weapons on Billy, then you have heavily hurt yourself with something you couldn't possibly predict. What is this, like the 5th or 6th time this has happened? Great, I guess you should be used to it by now. So Rebecca is left all alone now and is forced to fend for herself with no strong mother-loving arms to hold her tightly. Little does she know that she is headed straight into Fan Service County as she stumbles onto the secret train elevator from Resident Evil 2. And we as players get to clap because it is something that we have seen before. We get to see a bunch of little references to Resident Evil 2, like that little TV that Mr. X would eventually punch the camera for, except this time it seems to be focused on an ugly-ass tyrant. And instead of getting cornered by Mr. X, we get jumped by a few hunters. Inexplicably, Rebecca also runs into Enrico here, who seems to have just finished exploring part of the secret lab, which raises so many questions about how he got here, how he is leaving, and why he isn't reporting everything via the radio, and more. But let's just focus on the scene at hand. Enrico orders Rebecca to follow him to the mansion to meet up with the rest of the team, I assume excluding Edward, who Rebecca fails to tell him about, but Rebecca wants to stay behind to find Billy.
Come on, let's go.
Wait, I've got to find Billy.
Billy Cohen? You mean you found that criminal?
Yes, but we got separated and...
No point worrying about him. He won't make it. Come on, let's go.
You see, she last saw him fall into a black abyss, and instead of assuming that he smashed his skull open on some rocks or that he was torn apart by the monkey, she believes that she just hasn't looked hard enough for him yet.
Sir, please. I need to find him. Don't worry, I'll catch up with you.
And so, despite there being horrible monsters everywhere, Enrico decides to leave his most fragile team member behind to search for a convict that realistically should be dead. I'm starting to believe that most of Bravo team died purely because of this man's leadership. There goes a true clown.
I never saw him again.
So Rebecca begins to leave this secret lab, but just before she can take the elevator out, she gets stopped by the horrible creature we saw on the TV screen. The Proto-Tyrant. And listen, I'm not here to be a cruel man. I am not here just to shit on content because it's fun, though it is very fun. I am more than willing to give praise when I feel it applicable. And god damn it, the Proto-Tyrant is badass as hell. I love its design, the way its jaw just hangs open, its protruding spine, its enlarged heart and claw, and probably my favorite detail is the jerky animation they give him, almost as if he's occasionally glitching out and having spasms. It gives this tyrant a lot of personality that its sibling lacked. And you know what? The fight isn't half bad too. The main thing to remember when fighting this guy is that his claw is a lot longer than you might think it is. So many times I'd run by his lunge attack only to just get barely nicked by that thing. Other than that move, the fight is just a game of trying to keep away from him in this really tight space. At least it is if you actually engage with the fight. You see, once you got on the tram, you received a Magnum, plus some extra rounds later on. It only takes about 10 rounds to down the Proto-Tyrant, and he has a massive stun lock animation that can be triggered just by unloading into him with the Magnum, ending the fight in less than 30 seconds. Disappointing, because I really do think that this fight wasn't that bad, and it seems so refreshing after playing some of the worst parts of this game. You even get this really cool secret if you leave and come back that implies he got up and busted out of this room that shuttered for no clear reason. It's all pretty nice stuff. Once the Proto-Tyrant is defeated, we can take the elevator to, I actually don't know where any of these floors take us. I mean, we've traveled so far, surely we must be in completely new areas or something. Let's just pick one at random and... oh, we're back at the train crash. So we're already back to nonsense. That didn't take very long at all. This is referred to as the magic elevator by the fandom due to the lack of clear geography for its structure. Realistically, there's no way that a single vertical shaft would be able to connect the marshalling yard, the water treatment plant, and the training facility all at once. That, or all these locations would have to essentially be piled on top of each other. It makes absolutely no sense, but it clearly exists for gameplay purposes in order to allow the player to go back and collect items that they may have left behind. If only we had, like, I don't know, a box or something that we could, like, put items in and then pull them out at a different box? Seriously, there's no reason we couldn't have had the dropping items mechanic and the storage box mechanic at the same time. I'm not even talking about having a lot of storage boxes, maybe just put one at the beginning of every new area you go to, leaving there 3 in total for the whole game. That way, stuff like this elevator wouldn't be necessary. It's really inconsistent, but when you look at some of the bizarre stuff that happens in this game, this elevator is kinda cute in comparison. Kinda like a tourist spot. Don't forget to take your picture with the magic elevator on your way to the end of the game. But before we move on, let's try to flesh out a very important question. Is this the exact same lab from Resident Evil 2? If you've never thought about this question before, then you might immediately jump to, of course it is! But the answer might be more complicated than you might think. Yes, the lab here has almost the exact same layout as Resident Evil 2, same operator room, same train and turntable, same elevator, same everything. But I say almost the same layout because it isn't clear whether a door in this back corner actually exists in Resident Evil 2. There are also pretty big differences between the surrounding area of the map, but it is a bit fair to assume that there are some artistic liberties being taken when remaking a location in Resident Evil 0. So you might assume it is the exact same lab that Leon and Claire visit in a few months. But there are several inconsistencies if that's the case. First, the geography is odd because the lab was supposed to be on the outskirts of Raccoon City, but here it seems to be in the Arklay Mountains, near the mansion and the training facility. Secondly, the RE2 lab should still be in operation. People would likely be walking around, and there certainly shouldn't be hunters and a few zombies roaming around this place. Third is that Rebecca and Enrico don't seem interested in this lab, which if it was the lab for Resident Evil 2, it should be stuffed to the brim with evidence and still be functional even after the mansion incident. Though it should be noted that giving this prompt at all is terrible. I mean, I'm still curious what's behind there. It probably would have helped answer this whole question too. All of our Resident Evil experience tells us that we should be exploring every single room, but then we get slapped in the face by Rebecca telling us no you. At the very least, it should have been changed to something like, I don't have time, I need to find Billy, instead. So did Umbrella create 2 almost perfectly identical labs, only to abandon one of them just because it was connected to the closed training facility? Or is this the actual lab from Resident Evil 2, the Nest as it would later be called? I'm honestly surprised that more people don't posit this question, but at the same time, I'm not, because it is pretty outlandish. Then again, this entire game is outlandish, so I don't know. Is it the Resident Evil 2 lab with a massive amount of inconsistencies, or is it a replica of the lab that exists solely for a callback? I'm not sure I can confidently say either one is correct because they're both very unsatisfying. I think I'd lean more towards it being a copy, but the entire situation is needlessly unclear. The fact that I'm having to have this discussion at all should be a testament to how messy this game is. So Rebecca takes the magic elevator over to the final section of the game, a water treatment plant that has been hidden away underground. But before entering, the first thing that she sees is Billy's limp body somehow caught on some debris, after surviving a massive fall, escaping the monkey that came with him, and not immediately drowning. He then gets knocked back into the rushing waters by an unknown creature, so Rebecca sets off to find him, but not before doing a, honestly, pretty nice and simple puzzle in the next room. She very quickly finds Billy, who I guess managed to crawl out of the water and lie down on his back while his lungs were still full of water. Okay, everything that's happened ever since Billy was attacked by the monkey has been non-stop coincidences, which really gives Resident Evil 0's story a lack of momentum. Nothing is intentional. It doesn't feel like Rebecca knows what she's doing and that she has a clear goal she's working towards. She just keeps stumbling through rooms and things happen. She had no idea where Billy had fallen to. She had no idea how she would rescue him, but all she had to do was keep opening doors and wowee, there he is! She doesn't even have to resuscitate him. I think it would have been nice to see the medic use some of her medical knowledge, but that's just me. Upon waking up, Billy notices a bunch of old bodies sitting in the corner. The two look in horror at the grisly sight before them, wondering how something like this is even possible. The immorality triggers horrifying flashbacks to Billy's past, the event that cost him his life, despite him trying to prevent such a tragedy. And then...
Billy?
The cutscene just ends. Hey, am I the only one who just got the biggest, bluest balls ever seen by mankind just now? Excluding the beginning of the game, they have done so little with Billy and Rebecca's relationship and character development, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity for something strong and meaningful, but instead, it ended on a sudden cut to black right when it seemed like it was going somewhere. What a waste! Okay, here's an idea. Make Billy more angsty and uncooperative throughout the game. Then we get to this part. Rebecca actually saves Billy's life, and it awakens a new realization in Billy that there are caring people in the world, and that Rebecca is probably one of the best friends he's ever had. Just when his guard starts to lower, he spots a bunch of bodies that triggers his PTSD and utterly immobilizes him. This character that seemed so strong finally caves in when reminded about his past, and it becomes clear at this point that Billy is a genuinely good guy on the inside who's being tormented by factors outside of his control. His coping mechanism was to put on a tough exterior, but now it's all crashed down. Then Rebecca steps in and helps pull him out of his trauma by comforting and helping distract him. It turns out that Rebecca's caring and soft spirit is exactly what Billy needed, and not to close him off from people like he's been doing the entire time. There are a ton of ways this could have been done, and maybe you think that my idea was stupid or that I'm an idiot or that my voice is annoying, but at least it was something instead of cutting to black like the last episode of Sopranos, running away from any potential character conflict like it will give you leprosy. As is, this scene doesn't offer us any new information. All it tells us is that Billy doesn't like senseless murder, and that Umbrella is doing some bad stuff, both of which we already knew from cutscenes and notes hours earlier. At this point of the game, near the final act, you would expect some sort of revelation or character growth, but instead it's nothing. The bottom line is that this cutscene is a waste of so much potential. Now our team is back together again, and if the previous cutscenes weren't enough evidence of this, this is about where you can tell that the game has simply run out of steam. If there was any creative spark back at the beginning of this game, then by now it is running on fumes. The level design of the water treatment plant is basically one big circle that can't even be looped until halfway through the section. It's areas like this that make you really appreciate the use of something as simple as a hallway. Because now, in order to get from one side to the other, you have to run through so many small rooms that are basically connected like a chorus line. You'll likely have cleared these spaces on your first go around, but that's assuming that there are actually things to do in them at some point. It's crazy how many of these rooms have no purpose whatsoever besides connecting to another room. Unless you're going to tell me that squashing some stationary leeches qualifies as content. It's like the illusion of density. Yes, there are a lot of rooms that are tightly spiraled around each other on the map, but there isn't a whole lot going on in them, and it takes quite a while to go through them all. If you never wanted to install that door animation mod that skips all the transitions, then this area might change your mind. And as I said, the contents within these rooms are very lackluster. Yeah, there are some items to pick up and a few monsters to fight, but most of these enemies have been reduced down to zombies and hunters. There is one Leech man, but just like most of them, you can run right by it and then never encounter it again. So a majority of the enemies that you face in this area just feel like fodder at this point. They did try to introduce a new enemy, but like most of this game, the execution is very flawed. Only in this area appear the Lurkers, giant mutated frogs that only appear after you save Billy, and they only have a chance to appear in 4 rooms. Again, they have a chance to appear. Some players might never run into one. Realistically, most players will only run into 1 or 2 of these guys, maybe 3 or more if you're doing a lot of backtracking. And if you know what you're doing, it's likely that you'll only end up running into 1 of these on the dam. When you do, you can just turn around, climb back up the ladder, and then it jumps back into the water, never to be seen again. So it might as well be none. If you do end up fighting one of these things, they only have 2 moves. The first is that they'll just give you a little bitty lick, but the other involves slowly dragging you into its mouth. You are able to wiggle out of it, but unless you have plenty of distance between you and the frog, or a partner to save you, this will likely result in an instant death. And what's cool about this is that most players will encounter their first lurker after sending Rebecca off on a fun little trip in a box, so you'll have no backup. You'll probably get caught off guard by it suddenly popping out of the water and being an enemy that you've never seen before, and then it'll eat you, leading to a quick and frustrating death. So what limited experiences players have with these frogs usually involves either instantly dying or barely interacting with them at all before they jump away, which isn't great. This ends up making lurkers very forgettable for most players, and if they do remember it, then they probably don't have fond memories. Now that's pretty much every enemy in the game, and you might have noticed a trend among them. Namely that a majority of them are just animals. Sometimes they're bigger than they're supposed to be, but still, mainly just animals, along with the extra runoff from Resident Evil 1 like zombies and hunters. I get why this is the case. Resident Evil 0 is supposed to be a direct prequel to Resident Evil 1, taking place only a day before that game, and Resident Evil 1 was full of enemies that were just zombified animals. Dogs, crows, snakes, spiders. As I said in my last video, they're running the gamut of common natural fears, and they managed to nail most of the big ones right off the bat. So then Resident Evil 0 comes along and wants to capture that exact same vibe, so not only does it reuse a lot of the same enemies, but it creates new ones within the same theme. Unfortunately, Resident Evil 1 already got all the good ones, so you can almost see what was going through the developers' minds when making new monsters for this game. Okay, we already did spiders, well, what else can we do? Well, scorpions are also arachnids. They're kinda scary. Alright, what else? Centipedes? Centipedes are pretty unpleasant. We could do that. What about bats? Some people are afraid of bats. I don't know, man. Monkeys? Frogs? Fuck it. Anything is scary enough if you make it big. Just put them all in. So the bestiary of this game begins to feel pretty repetitive, with only a few standout examples of new enemies, like the Leech Man or the Proto-Tyrant. And speaking of the Proto-Tyrant, we meet up with him again. I guess he decided to take a dip in the river because he crawls out of the water and corners us. Except this time we have 2 characters to stun lock him to death, and even if we didn't, the same tactic with the Magnum works here as well. I find this fight to be less engaging than the last one for two reasons. The first is the much more limited space. There is a sense of pressure as he slowly keeps pushing you back into the corner, but it doesn't leave much room to evade attacks. Or if you do dodge his attack, then you have quite a bit of space to lead him back down in the opposite direction. This means that this fight is a lot more encouraging of quick and aggressive tactics. The second reason is that if you come down here with two characters, evasion becomes much more difficult as you have to keep track of two bodies at once. So again, just unload into him. Nothing else to say here. Okay, so because I couldn't find a good place to talk about it before due to my general indifference to it, I think I'm gonna shove a quick segment here talking about it because we're nearing the end of the game. The music. Now, the music is fine. There are a few tracks that I can pick that would arguably stand out, like the safe room music, which is always a safe bet in these games. Then there's the Leech Man theme, which I don't even know if I think that's good or not. All I know is that I hear it all the time and it's really loud and it's stuck in my head. But other than that, I have trouble picking out any of the songs that really stand out to me here. This is a really bland selection. Like, bland enough that I want to retroactively apologize to Resident Evil 3. I can't believe that I called that game's soundtrack kind of forgettable when a game like this exists. Main problem with the music here is that it really wants to be Resident Evil 1! So every so often I'll be playing and then I'll hear a nice little piano motif that tickles my brain in a nice way and makes me go, ooh, it sounds like Resident Evil. But that ends up being all it does. It doesn't stick with me in memory, it just makes me go, that sounds like the other game. The other downside is that Resident Evil 0 wants to nail that ambient tone that Resident Evil 1 had. The original Resident Evil 1 had a ton of music in it, but when it came to the remake they added a lot more moments of ambient sounds and silence. So this game does a lot of that too, but ambient sounds and silence isn't very memorable. All that said, there aren't exactly songs that make me go, ugh. Besides maybe the Leech Man one for being loud and annoying. So the overall experience is just meh. Not super bad, not super good. And overall forgettable. Last thing to talk about might be the remaining puzzles that we get in this area. And once again, there just isn't a whole lot to say. We have this one crate pushing puzzle, which is a nice callback to Resident Evil 2, except this time it features a bit more complexity, with both a box that cannot float being put into the mix, as well as a turning grate that must be operated by the other character. It's fine, just a little bit slow on repeat plays. Let's see, what else? Where there's one where the character stands on a crate and then use the other character to lift them up. Yeah. We're at the end of the game and we're still basically doing that. You know, split up two players just to have them press two different buttons in different locations. And that's the whole puzzle. It never really evolved beyond that, did it? From the very beginning to the very end, it's always just split up the two characters to have them push two different buttons. Not what I would hope for. And this leads us to the final fights of the game. Billy and Rebecca run into a furnace room, which is absolutely covered in leeches, and are greeted by the funny opera man. Isn't it weird to think about how our main characters have only seen the main antagonist of this game once before this? They likely don't even know that this guy's been sending monkeys and leechmen to harass them. So this is all gotta be very weird, coming out of nowhere like this.
Welcome, young ones. So glad you have joined the party. You are the guests of honor. After all, it's your wake.
Who are you? Dr. Marcus?
No, you can't be. What's going on?
10 years ago, Spencer had me assassinated.
No, it's cool. Look, I can do it too. I'm an old man, and this is my old man voice. Albert Wesker cyberbullied me to death by calling my Naruto AMV cringe. So the handsome young man we kept getting glimpses of is actually Marcus all along, not his son. He was just minding his own business, injecting his leeches and whatnot, when Wesker and Berkern came in and just destroyed him out of nowhere, then proceeded to gloat over his dying body.
I will take over your research.
I will be the Dr. Marcus now. Ha 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 ha.
However, something wondrous happened. It took the T-virus inside of my queen years to procreate my new life.
I live. Now I will have my revenge on Umbrella, and the world will burn in an inferno of hate.
You'll pay for what you've done.
We'll see which one of us is gonna die.
Aside from the not great voice acting, that cutscene was pretty confusing. Based on what is shown and said, it seems to imply that the leech went down the throat of Marcus's corpse, and then somehow restored his dead cells, which is depicted by these gross gray cells becoming a healthy red. Well, despite that being the obvious takeaway from what is presented, the story is actually that the Queen Leech ate Marcus's body, and then assimilated his memories and knowledge, before eventually just turning into him, but younger. If you're wondering where I got that information from, then it certainly wasn't the game. It was from the internet. Here's a snippet from the official Resident Evil website. If that was the case, then I don't know why they ended up depicting it the way they did. Some of that has precedent. We know that the leeches can mimic people and that they were growing more intelligent, but the whole absorbing his memories thing comes out of nowhere. Does the Queen Leech not even know its own backstory? Is that why it seems so surprised when it starts turning into a monster? Did it not know it could do that? Did this come as a shock? This does not look like the face of a man who knows what's going on. Regardless, this begins the Queen Leech boss fight, and this is basically a slightly more complex and way more tanky first phase tyrant fight. It's one of those bosses where you need to just not get too close and not get too greedy when unloading into them. Very simple stuff, but I'd say it is better than the Tyrant's fight because at least this fight doesn't end in 10 seconds. There is a bit more complexity when you're worrying about two characters at once, but for the most part there isn't much to say about it. Just don't get close. There is a bizarre AI quirk here though, where the queen will only target Rebecca, so you can just stick Billy in the corner to give moral support while you lead the queen around this loop 50 times. That's how I ended up beating her on hard difficulty. The two defeat the Queen Leech and begin to take the lift out of the facility, but that's when the queen grows 5 times her original size and bursts through the wall to take chase after our heroes. And then, I guess Birkin finally stopped procrastinating because the self-destruct sequence becomes active. The Leech Queen tackles the lift, knocking Billy and Rebecca into a warehouse, and the final fight begins. Phase 2 Leech Queen is unfortunately just as simple as the phase before. It crawls around after the player while periodically shooting some acid goo out its back, with the primary threat being cornered by its massive body blocking your path. Not much of a strategy here beyond just not getting cornered and unloading as fast as you can. After enough damage had been dealt, it is revealed that the leeches work on vampire rules, so they burn in the sunlight, which I'd say makes them far more useless than your average zombie, so I have no idea why Marcus was as obsessed with them as he was. From here on, the fight is, well, pretty much the exact same. Except now the queen is chasing after Rebecca, who is now automatically running to 4 different valves in order to open the roof. It is your job as Billy to distract the queen from Rebecca by unloading your remaining ammunition into it. So same plan as before. except maybe even a bit easier, because the queen isn't even cornering you anymore as it turns around to go after your partner. And you technically don't even have to unload into it, you can just shoot it periodically to make sure it keeps the attention towards you. Honestly, for the final encounter in the game, this is awfully anticlimactic. It has the spectacle of a giant horrible monster tearing up everything around it, but the actual gameplay is borderline mind-numbingly simple. I had my criticisms of Resident Evil 3, but I'd argue this is just a far less engaging version of that game's final boss fight. At least then you were actually doing something as opposed to just firing a few times and running away. Once the roof is open, the creature shrieks and begins to retreat into the shadows, but Rebecca locates a magnum on the ground, and thinking fast, she throws it to Billy, who delivers the finishing line.
Hey, Queenie! Feast on this!
B- action line. It kinda makes sense, but you have to think about it and make the strenuous connection between leeches and feasting. I mean, there wasn't any reoccurring line or anything about feasts or feasting, so it comes nowhere close to.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
Would it have not been better to say, suck on this, because leeches suck your blood? I don't know. Everything was so underdeveloped, they didn't really have much to work with. At least the shot of the bullet going through the queen is pretty sick though. I love the way all the light shines through its guts. The training facility blows up, and Billy and Rebecca gaze at the mountains from atop a hill. Billy tosses away his cuffs, and Rebecca declares Billy dead.
Officially, Lieutenant Billy Cohen is dead.
Yeah, I'm just a zombie now.
The two have a moment. Rebecca heads off to do a Resident Evil 1, and then Billy gives her a thumbs up as she's walking away, which has to be some weird Japanese shit that does not translate to the West very well. And then we get a shot of a butterfly trapped in a web on top of the Spencer mansion, hinting towards the horrors that await her on her next adventure. Billy Cohen is never referenced again in any other Resident Evil game, at least at the time of writing, so either he is stuck living in a forest somewhere, or the government got him and carried out his sentence.
I never saw him again.
Either way, I feel like completely abandoning his identity and living in perpetual fear that if he gets found out, he'll get executed isn't as happy of an ending for this character as this game would like me to believe. Or maybe I'm just not aware of how easy it is to create a new identity, I don't know. As for Rebecca, it's odd that she had such a different character in this game as opposed to Resident Evil 1. In that game, she was barely equipped and near useless, despite this game showing that she has the skills to deal with massive threats like a proto-tyrant all on her own, along with the skills to find resources and survive in dangerous situations. Even if we assume she left the facility with absolutely nothing on her, we know that the mansion is full of additional goodies she could use. And I know I gotta bring this up because if I don't, then I'm gonna get a bunch of people commenting it, but the number one defense of why Rebecca is the way she is in Resident Evil Remake is that she's tired. That she's already gone through one big adventure, and by the time that Resident Evil 1 starts, she's already used up all her ammo, health, and energy, which honestly feels like a band-aid to a glaring hole in the story to me. There are weapons and ammo all over the mansion, so she really shouldn't have run out of her firepower at any point. But I also find it kind of difficult to believe that she wouldn't have been able to find any location where she could have caught her breath or taken a nap. If Richard could spend enough time to recover from a giant snake bite, then I don't see why she couldn't find somewhere to rest. So I'm not convinced. This game in general didn't seem too preoccupied when it comes to thinking about how a prequel connects to the rest of the franchise anyway. It seemed like this game was really interested in telling a story that didn't need to be told. If this story did not exist, then the RE timeline would be perfectly fine. We didn't need to know the answer to the question, who released the T-virus into the Spencer mansion? Because we could have easily assumed that, I don't know, probably some guy dropped a test tube or something. I mean, look at their labs, they have a lower sanitation requirement than your average McDonald's restroom. So if you needed another reason as to why Resident Evil 0 is so forgettable, there you go. It didn't need to exist to begin with. Let's move on to the endgame content. After completing the story, it unlocks a new game mode called Leech Hunter, and here is where a majority of the extra unlocks are stored away. In this game, you take Billy and Rebecca throughout the entire training facility part of the campaign, and you collect colored leeches that can only be picked up by specific characters. There are 100 leeches in total, and they cannot be dropped once in your pocket. You can choose to end the game at any time, and you will be graded based on the number of leeches you manage to collect. Then you'll receive a specific reward for the grade, and I was really getting into this game on my first playthrough. The idea of having to strategically work around an ever-shrinking inventory as you explore, while collecting any of the limited weaponry that you can get your hands on was a really interesting concept to me, and I was appreciating the challenge. Then, once I died on my first run, I made a disappointing realization. The game doesn't grade or penalize you whatsoever on your time. You can take as long as you want and you'll still get the same grade in the end, as long as you don't die. When I realized that, the game flushed all potential it had down the toilet. Why would I fill up my inventory with leeches that I can't remove, making it harder and harder for me to hold ammo, or the 2-slot weapons that I desperately need in order to clear rooms, when I can just clear all the rooms first and then go back to pick everything up? This guarantees that with enough time, you will eventually be able to collect everything with no hindrances. There are only 2 things that can slip you up. One is that once you reach the final 90 or so leeches, a lot of areas repopulate. So if you needed to backtrack at all, that could cost you. I almost thought I had to do that, but then I realized I was missing one right above this ladder that was hidden by the camera perspective. And the second is that if you've cleared every room, running back to collect everything gets really, really boring. Damn, that was quite a dramatic shift from genuinely having fun to bored once again. So I really can't recommend this minigame. Well, let's talk about the unlockables. After getting the highest rank in Leech Hunter, you're given a variety of rewards. E rank gives you some submachine gun rounds, D rank gives you infinite handgun rounds, C gives you infinite hunting gun rounds, B just gives you the Magnum kinda early, and A rank gives you infinite ammo everything. On the HD remaster, if you get A rank before anything else, you unlock everything all at once. And using the infinite ammo will all but guarantee that you'll be able to unlock the remaining items for beating the game in under 5 and 3.5 hours. A submachine gun, and of course the infinite rocket launcher. I do believe that games like this should have rewards for completing them, but I think I'm starting to not enjoy whenever these extra unlocks are hidden behind a bonus game as opposed to the main game itself. Infinite ammo should have been an unlock that was hidden behind completing the game on hard difficulty or something. You'd have basically completed the hardest challenge in the game, and so now you get the biggest reward. Instead, here you play the minigame and then you get an incredibly overpowered item that allows you to cheese the hardest challenge. And as a quick side note about hard difficulty, there isn't much to say about it. It's just like the hard difficulty in the Resident Evil 1 remake where you're generally left with less items overall, and that can lead to some interesting moments when playing the game again. What's weird though is that this game comes with hard mode immediately unlocked, and if you played through the Resident Evil 1 remake and didn't realize that the hardest difficulty that you chose on your first playthrough was not hard mode but actually normal difficulty, then you might feel like you're plenty prepared to tackle the hard difficulty right away. And most likely you will suffer. Along with the weapons, the game also gives you 2 new costumes. A nightclub outfit for Rebecca, and a snazzy suit for Billy, both of which I am a fan of. Those aren't the only costumes that you can unlock, but to go any further, you will need to feed the capitalist machine. Shell out some real cash and you can get just a shitload of costumes for Rebecca and like 2 for Billy. I wonder if there's some kind of preference for the cute tomboy character. Not a big fan of DLC, but costumes are harmless enough, and the selection isn't too bad. You get a lot of fan service in these, as they feature several costumes from other Resident Evil games, many of which I haven't talked about yet. But you also get some super niche costumes like the original design from the Resident Evil 0 beta, or her sports getup that Rebecca wore in the Easter egg picture from Resident Evil 2. Also, she gets a handful of free fan-designed t-shirts to wear, though I find these to be far less unique and interesting compared to the rest of the selection. Billy's 2 costumes pretty much consist of references to other Capcom games. He gets Cody's outfit from Street Fighter Alpha 3, which must have been chosen because both characters are prisoners, but honestly, I think it looks really bad here, like an ugly pair of pajamas. The other costume is a real deep cut, as it references Capcom's arcade shooter Mercs. I know absolutely nothing about that game, but this uniform is extremely over the top, so it gets my approval. And then the last unlockable to talk about is Wesker mode, which is unlocked after any playthrough. Similar to how the HD remaster of Resident Evil Remake included 2 new costumes that were just taken straight out of Resident Evil 5, this is a game mode that replaces Billy's model with Wesker's RE5 model. Surprisingly though, it doesn't end there. There is quite a bit of work put into this beyond just a model swap. It's hard for me to talk about this part since it might contain spoilers and I have yet to make a video on Resident Evil 5, so if you haven't played that game, skip to the next chapter. I'll give you a few seconds. Get the fuck out of here, you stupid motherfucker. Rebecca's outfit resembles Jill's, and it even includes the little mind control device on her chest, which is an extremely nice touch. I also love how her eyes glow a bright red now as well, almost as if she's been corrupted and joined Wesker's side, which is an adorable sight on such an innocent looking girl. As I said before, Billy's model is replaced with Wesker's, and while there is no change to his voice in cutscenes, and no change at all for the pre-rendered ones, while in-game, Billy's lines will all be replaced with Wesker's.
This is your chance.
Okay,
I don't need this.
Roger.
And it doesn't stop there, Bill Wesker will even get new powers. First, he has the ability to sprint forward using the super speed that Wesker is known for. While it is very cool and all, it ends up being a bit limited beyond losing a few minutes on the timer due to the constant starting and stopping to go through doors, and how most rooms in this game actually aren't that big enough for you to get that much distance in. Also, this is a power that was completely unprepared for classic controls. Good luck using this while moving like a tank. His second ability has him doing some kind of blast of energy with his mind that the game calls a death stare. I have no idea where this came from. I don't believe Wesker has ever been shown to have this ability, but who cares? This is fucking awesome. And I'm amazed the devs put in the effort. This is a really cool addition to the game. Though, I'm not sure if it's enough to make you want to replay it right after doing it the first time. I mean, that does still involve playing Resident Evil 0, so I don't know if it's worth it. Yeah, if I haven't made it clear yet, I don't think this is a very good game. Resident Evil 0 has always sat in this weird limbo where most people don't remember it as fondly as basically every other mainline entry, and it is often either praised by a niche group of Resident Evil fans, or defended as not that bad by people who are desperate to defend the classic games, lest they be forgotten to time via a never-ending onslaught of remakes. Well, I would like to make it clear. This isn't the best Resident Evil game you've never played. It's not a hidden gem, it doesn't just miss the mark, it's not a meh or whatever other opinionated title you have to use to draw in viewers nowadays. Resident Evil 0 is an egregiously bad survival horror game with some of the worst writing we've seen yet, and some baffling gameplay decisions that should not have made it through. Yes, it is that bad. That isn't to say it's devoid of quality. If you watch this video to the end, then you know that there are a handful of things I praised, some puzzles, some monster designs, and pretty much all of the pre-rendered backgrounds, but that doesn't stop the game from generally being a miserable experience, especially for new players, which this game seems intent on punishing non-stop. The game has barely any creativity when it comes to the new monsters introduced. When it comes to the more unique ones, they usually have severe problems that make them hard to praise, namely the Leechmen, who are often obnoxiously powerful. Eliminators get to join classic hunters as one of the most annoying enemies ever added, and many of the bosses never become fun. Ones like Stinger and Centurion are ridiculously easy to cheese and are shallow even if you don't. Then you got stuff like the Infected Bat, which is a complete catastrophe. The item management in this game is out of control, making several sections feel like a slog to play through, and it generally drags the entire game down to make it worse than it feels like it needed to be. Even when you know what you're doing, this game involves so much more inventory management than any of the other games. And there isn't even much to grab onto in terms of the story. Not only are the characters in this acted pretty badly,
We'll see which one of us is gonna die.
sometimes in so funny it's bad ways, sometimes just in awkward, uncomfortable ways.
Oh, I see. You're with stars.
But the actual story here is lacking any kind of depth despite the potential that it had in the beginning. Rebecca and Billy's conflict is resolved almost immediately, leading to basically nothing happening for the rest of the game. Marcus's inclusion is generally unneeded, even if he is fun to laugh at times, and Wesker and Birkin barely do anything. This isn't a game story that expands its characters. All it does is expand the history for characters, and then pretends that that is some kind of substance. What did we learn about Wesker and Birkin in this? That they went to a training facility that trained them to be evil, and then they betrayed Marcus together. That doesn't tell us anything new about the characters. It's not like they had any indication of being good people before they went to the training facility, and then they were slowly formed into the monsters that we see today. No, it's just that they were evil then, and they're evil now. Did we learn anything new about Umbrella? Well, we learned that there was a guy named Marcus. We learned that there was the progenitor virus, and it turned into the T-virus. What does that change? Nothing? Umbrella was evil then and evil now. We just have a few new keywords and nouns to write down. This is a story that simply didn't need to exist, and we have no payoffs for its existence now. Then there's the presentation. Yeah, the backgrounds look great, but you know what doesn't? The pre-rendered cutscenes. They often feature awkward animations with really poor lip sync. It also offers several moments where characters don't emote properly.
What just happened? I thought they were dead.
The music in this game is pretty much fine. I just find it to be incredibly forgettable, along with the game generally having a bad habit of playing the most obnoxious songs at really high volumes. This of course referencing the Leechman song. While the presentation has really high moments, it also has some pretty low lows, to be honest. Even though I'm not the kind of person to solely gush about things I enjoy, I've enjoyed playing through basically every Resident Evil game so far, excluding Survivor 2. And the mainline games have all been pretty much on a roll for me. I'll gladly replay Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, and Code Veronica, despite what some people might believe. Guys, a 6 out of 10 is not actually a bad score, it's actually more on the positive side. IGN has just ruined all your brains into thinking that a 6 out of 10 means it's bad. But Resident Evil 0? This is a game that is a chore to run through, and I was actively dreading this video where I'd have to play it to 100%. This is a new low for the mainline Resident Evil games. I'm going to give Resident Evil 0 a 3 out of 10, but like a high 3 out of 10. Like it would be a 3.5 if I ever decided to start using decimals in my grade. This means it'll be going right above the first Survivor game on my ranking. Definitely one of the lower games. Such a shame that the last classic Resident Evil game had to end on such a sour note. This is the last one of its lineage, which means we'll be getting into Resident Evil's action era soon. But first, we have quite a few spin-offs to look at, so join me next time as we take a look at Resident Evil Dead Aim. If you enjoyed this video, then do all the cool stuff that makes the algorithm happy. And if you want to help me produce these videos faster, then join my Patreon and tell me to hurry up by showering me with money. Thank you so much for watching to the end, and stay Resident Evil. I don't know, I don't have a catchphrase yet.